July 2004. The NFL's best running back walked away from $8.6 million. No press conference, no explanation, just gone.
2 days before training camp, you don't just quit.
Why told you couldn't smoke pot for 3 years and make $5 million a year, $15 million? Did you do it?
The sports world called him crazy, a quitter, a waste. They were wrong. You're about to find out what everyone got wrong.
He turned his back on all of it. The stardom, the fame.
It appears as if Ricky Williams chose marijuana over football.
Before Ricky Williams became the guy who quit, he was the guy an NFL team gave up everything to draft. In 1999, the New Orleans Saints traded 8 picks for every selection they had left that year, plus their first and third rounders the following season, just to move up 7 spots to be able to take him 5th overall. No team in NFL history had ever paid that price for a single player. And Mike Ditka, the head coach who made it happen, was so convinced he'd found the next Walter Payton that he put on a tuxedo for the ESPN magazine cover. Ricky wore a wedding dress. That's how badly New Orleans wanted him. And the talent backed it up. At the University of Texas, Ricky broke 21 NCAA records and won the Heisman Trophy after rushing for 2,124 yards and 27 touchdowns in his senior season. He left campus with a statue next to Earl Campbell and got to the NFL and just kept dominating. By 2002, he was with the Miami Dolphins after a trade. Ricky was the best running back in football. Led the league with 1,853 rushing yards. First team All-Pro, Pro Bowl MVP. 10 games over 100 yards, including back-to-back weeks where he dropped 228 against Buffalo and then 216 against Chicago. It was a monster season. So why did he quit the very next year? Why would someone walk away from that 8 days before training camp with nothing but a fax from halfway around the world?
I made the biggest mistake of his life. Would I take him back? I would.
Most people thought they knew the answer. They pointed to the suspensions, the failed tests, and the headlines. But those were symptoms, not the disease. This isn't a story about weed or burnout. It's a man who figured something out that the rest of us haven't.
Playing football, for me, it's not going to be fun, not something I'm going to enjoy, and it's time for me to do something different.
To understand why Ricky walked away, you have to go back 3 months before that fax. By May 2004, the story broke. Ricky Williams had tested positive for substance abuse back in December, and the NFL hit him with a $650,000 fine and a 4-game suspension to start the season.
Had Ricky Williams not retired, he would have been suspended for the first 4 games of this season because he failed a 3rd career drug test for marijuana.
Second documented positive test. By the time everything came out, people found out there had been 4 failed tests total, with the league coming down hard, making an example out of him. For most people watching, that explained everything. Lack of discipline, a player who couldn't stay clean long enough to keep a $25 million contract. But here's where it gets interesting. The NFL called it a substance abuse issue, but Ricky called it something else. So who was right? If you've ever had a job that paid well but felt like a cage, you already understand the part nobody talks about. 3 years earlier, in March 2001, Ricky had been diagnosed with something the sports world didn't have language for yet. Social anxiety disorder. Not game day nerves, clinical. Severe enough that post-game interviews felt like torture. For years, Ricky did those interviews with his helmet still on, visor down, refusing to make eye contact with reporters who thought he was just being difficult. Teammates thought he was arrogant. Fans thought he was weird.
You know, I always loved Ricky. Ricky didn't give anybody a chance to love him.
Ricky knew something was wrong. He just didn't have a name for it until a therapist named Janie Barnes sat down and explained what was happening in his brain. That wedding dress photo shoot with Ditka made everything worse. By 2002, even on good days, Ricky struggled to leave his house for basic errands. On bad days, he could barely talk to his own daughter. So he started taking medications and even became a spokesperson for the company that made it. But by 2004, he'd quit the medication. He said the substance worked better for him. The league disagreed. So did the media. And the fans who paid to watch him run. 2 months after that May suspension, Ricky stopped asking for permission. What he did next made everyone think he'd lost his mind. July 24th, 2004. The Miami Dolphins were 8 days from training camp when that fax came through from halfway around the world. 1 page. No press conference, no apology, no interview where he explained himself to anyone. Just a document saying Ricky Williams was done with football. And by the time anyone in Miami read it, he was already gone. He was living in a tent community in Australia that cost $7 a day. He stayed there for weeks, reading books on nutrition and Buddhism, trying to figure out who he was when nobody was asking him to run a football for their entertainment. Someone handed him a book on Ayurveda, and something clicked. He went to Fiji after that, then flew back to California. That fall, while the Dolphins were stumbling to a 4-12 record without him, Ricky was sitting in a classroom in Grass Valley, a tiny town an hour outside Sacramento, learning about medicine and energy healing. After that, he went to India for a month. He completed yoga teacher training in an ashram, then went back to the States to study craniosacral therapy. While the NFL was billing him for $8.6 million for breaching his contract, Ricky was sitting cross-legged in a field in Northern California meditating. When reporters finally tracked him down and asked if he regretted any of it, he told them flat out it was the best year of his life. The story the media told wasn't about a guy trying to save his own mind, but about a millionaire who threw away his career to get high.
True, but not the way that people say it, that I quit football to go to smoke weed.
For that story to work, you have to ignore everything Ricky kept saying, which was that football never felt like a blessing to him. It felt like a cage, and everyone around him kept telling him he should be grateful for it. In the summer of 2005, Ricky came back. He paid back a chunk of the signing bonus, took his 4-game suspension without complaint, and got back to work. He was scheduled to make $540,000 that year, but after the fines and docked pay for the suspension, his take-home was $286,000. So he shared carries with rookie Ronnie Brown, kept his head down, and played his role. To everyone watching from the outside, it looked like a redemption. A guy coming to his senses, getting back in line, realizing he'd made a mistake. Then, in February 2006, he tested positive again. And so the NFL suspended him for the season. No appeal, no wiggle room, no second chance this time. But the NFL wasn't done with Ricky Williams, and neither was the thing he'd been running from his whole career. So in May 2006, the Toronto Argonauts made him an offer. $340,000 Canadian for 1 season, which made him the highest paid running back in the CFL. He took it and wore number 27, played for a coach named Pinball Clemens, who seemed to understand him. Then, 2 months into the season, Ricky broke a bone in his left arm during a game in Saskatchewan, so he had to get surgery. A week after that, a door at the practice facility swung back and clipped his Achilles tendon. 16 stitches to close the gash. He missed 2 months recovering from both injuries. But when he came back in September, he rushed for 526 yards in 11 games and helped Toronto make the playoffs. It wasn't the 2002 version of Ricky Williams. It wasn't even close. But in an interview that fall, Ricky said something most people watching didn't understand. Ricky said he loved Toronto because it felt like he could live there. He could walk to the store with his daughter and be a person instead of a product. For the first time in years, he said he felt like he had a life. That thing he'd been running from his whole career, it was waiting for him back in Miami. When Ricky finally faced it, nobody expected what happened next. When Ricky walked back into the Dolphins facility in 2007, nobody knew what to expect. 2 retirements, 5 failed tests, a year living in a tent in Australia, a broken arm in Canada. Most guys don't come back from that kind of chaos. But Ricky showed up anyway, ready to work. And then, in the very first game of the season, he tore his pectoral muscle, so he was out for the year. Another setback, another lost season, another round of people saying he was finished for good. But he came back in 2008, and then in 2009, something nobody saw coming happened.
The Wildcat, and here is Ricky Williams running inside, walks in for the touchdown.
At 32 years old, 6 years removed from his last 1,000-yard season, Ricky rushed for 1,121 yards and 11 touchdowns. And his yards per carry were 4.7, almost identical to his 2002 All-Pro campaign. He also set an NFL record that still stands. Longest gap between 1,000-yard rushing seasons. 6 years. By then, most running backs are retired. But Ricky made it look effortless. Now, that's when the thing he'd been running from finally caught up to him. Not the anxiety or the failed tests. The thing Ricky had been running from was the question of whether he could live with himself if he kept playing a game that was destroying him. And the answer, finally, was no. He couldn't.
2003 was a wake-up call for me. It hit me like, I'm not going to be able to do this for the rest of my life because my body is not going to be able to hold up.
But he also couldn't walk away until he proved to himself that the decision was his and not the NFL's, not the suspensions or the injuries. And so the reckoning wasn't a collapse. It was a confrontation with what football had always meant to him and what it had cost. So Ricky played one more season in Miami. And then in 2011, he signed with the Baltimore Ravens. 2-year deal worth $2.5 million. He backed up Ray Rice, helped the Ravens go 12-4, and made it all the way to the AFC Championship before losing to New England on a missed field goal. And then, on January 1st, 2012, in the regular season finale against Cincinnati, Ricky crossed 10,000 career rushing yards. He became the 26th player in NFL history to hit that mark. Then, 5 weeks later, on February 7th, 2012, he announced his retirement. Clean, quiet, no facts from Australia this time. No drama. The Ravens won the Super Bowl the next year. By then, Ricky was working as a cameraman, figuring out what came next. Today, Ricky Williams runs 2 plant-based wellness companies, Real Wellness and Heisman. He's a mental health advocate who speaks at conferences and lobbies on Capitol Hill for federal legalization. He co-founded an astrology app, hosts a podcast, and teaches mindfulness and meditation. He got his psychology degree from the University of Texas. Then he studied herbalism at Emperor's College and became a certified yoga instructor. The guy the NFL tried to make an example of became exactly what he said he wanted to be all along. A healer, a teacher, someone who chose his own mind over everyone else's expectations. And when you look back at that facts from Australia now, at that July 2004 retirement that broke the internet, it doesn't look like a breakdown anymore. It looks like the moment Ricky stopped running from the question and turned around to face it. The moment he chose survival over performance. The moment he realized the cage door was only locked because he kept pretending it was. He walked away from something that was killing him and built a life that made him want to wake up in the morning. So the question was never why Ricky Williams walked away from football. The question is, what does it say about us that when a man chose his own mind over our entertainment, we called him a failure? Ricky has one career regret. He wishes he'd finished everything as a Dolphin. He was 301 yards away from becoming their all-time rushing leader. But everything else, the facts, the tent in Australia, the suspensions, the CFL, all of it, he'd do again. His story wasn't unique. Ricky Williams retired with 10,009 rushing yards and a life he chose. Not the cautionary tale the NFL wanted, but the redemption nobody expected. Ricky wasn't the last player the NFL tried to make an example of. Some caved and disappeared. Others fought back and lost everything. But one refused to back down and took a knee instead. What happened next changed the league forever. If this story hit you different, drop a comment below telling us what you think, and if you learned something you didn't know before, subscribe, because what's coming next will blow your mind.